Japanese spears called a yari. You got a whole group of people with spears, and I've got a whole group of people with spears. My team's trying to stab you, and you're trying to stab them, and standing at the end of the line is some big dumb guy with a monster, highly skilled samurai with this giant oversized weapon, and when your row would reach in to stab, my job was to step in from the side and go, flump! Because if I can cut the heads off of a whole row of spears, you know what you guys are left with? Sticks. And they were a cool rock band, but on the battlefield, a stick is not a good battlefield weapon. You have a stick, we have spears, we're going to win. After the first couple waves were wiped out, some genius in the back on your team, known as an officer, would go, hey, we can do that too. And so you'd find some large, poorly trained person, give them a big sword, say, here, you, cut the heads off their spears. And to prevent that from happening, I fight with them. And since we're both using the same weapon, that huge problem of speed and recovery time doesn't exist because it's a neutral zone. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So these were really common for use on the battlefield with large troop movements. But as a one-on-one weapon, you didn't find them because they were just simply too slow. And as long as she's using both hands on her sword, it's not like the size difference between the weapons is going to give me a huge advantage when I swing, because she can still block and move and cover, and I'm going to lose a one-on-one fight with my wife, no matter what, even if I'm right. I mean, if I'm ever right. Now, I said the Nodachi was 3 shaku on up, so 36 inches on up. Somebody asked the last panel what the biggest sword that was usable was. So they actually, you find some of these that would be 5 feet in length, 5 shaku. That doesn't mean that was the largest ever created. Anybody want to guess what the longest traditionally made, folded steel, differentially heat-treated blade was?
The Merm.
World history, longest sword made.
10 feet.
2 feet.
8. 20.
12.
13. 15.
17 feet, 11 inches.
Who swung
Now
that?
think about that. 18 shaku. Somebody made
That was a dinosaur.
folded steel, differentially heat treated. Everything at the smithy had to be custom made to make this sword. But they made a blade, and it was for a temple. Never got mounted because the handle on it would have been almost 4.5 feet long.
Right.
But it was for a shrine to sit on the as a testament to. I have no idea. Greed. 17 feet 11 inches. Why did they even make a sword like that? I have no idea. Actually, I said that at conventions all over the country. And one con I took my teenage son to, and he was sitting behind me while I was being stupid. I mean, being me. Seems redundant, doesn't it? I said, I have no idea why they made this sword. 17 feet 11 inches. And my son's like, Dad. I'm like, what? I'm talking here. He's like, how big was the sword? I'm like, I just said 17 feet 11 inches. He goes, what country was this? Japan! He goes, and you don't know why they made that? I'm like, no! And he's like, Godzilla, hello! And I'm like, you're grounded. But it was worth it to him. Oh yeah, he totally got me on that. But they didn't always have those really cool little things that shoot the electricity out at them, and from the old Godzilla movies.
Yeah.
I still want one of those. For stray cats. No, the thing that shoots electricity.
Yeah.
Our neighbors have lots of cats, and since leash laws pretty much apply just to dogs, our neighbors will just let their cats outside to go to the bathroom or to roam, because the cats will come over and poop in our yard, or sharpen their claws on our stuff, and get in our trash and scatter it all over. And if I could hide out with one of those things that shoots bolts of electricity, how cool would that be? Neighbor kids. Anyway, that has very little to do with the history of sharpshooter. But there you have it. from Kanto to Nodachi. Questions? Yes.
Besides the Japanese blades, what other blades would you say are really good? What? Like?
All of them. I like all of them. For anybody curious, if I do Western stuff, yes, I own 2 martial swords. They're basically broadswords patterned after sword used, recovered, dates back to 980 AD. I have 2 martial swords that I really like using. We have a Viking blade, have a claymore, but honestly I'm not a huge fan of it. But that doesn't mean I don't know how to fight with them. It just annoys me going to places with Western martial arts groups and trying to help teach combat stuff when none of them know how to use a claymore. Because their idea is to take the biggest, heaviest person they can find and give him the big monster sword, and he takes the sumo stance and then stands there and goes, whoa, whoa,
Oh, man.
with a monstrous sword that was slow and heavy, and that's not how claymores were meant to be used. Have you ever played tag with a friend and used a tree? Defensively, that's how you used a claymore. You held the sword between you and the bad guy, and he swings, and I go here and block. And then when he takes the rebound and comes around to this side, I have both hands separated on a 4-foot handle and a 6-pound blade. When he brings the sword back and whips it around his head, the front of his body is what we in the martial arts industry call a target. So I'm going to step that way and use push-pull dynamics to go wham! And cut his leg off. Which, by the way, interrupts his swing. And from there, I finish the move by stepping forwards, bringing it up, reversing my hands, and going, bye, doink! And then I can just leave it there as a marker. And that was the Highlander 1. And McLeod, upright. Hi. So actually, I love claymores. Basically, anything that's sharp, shiny, and pointy, I like.
What about Celtic style swords?
I like those too.
I love Celtic swords.
And the falcata, and just pretty much anything.
Do you have a naginata?
Naginata is a Japanese
I
pole
want
arm.
one
It's
really
basically
bad.
a sword on a stick.
I want one so bad.
And
It's
if
so
you
cool.
want to know if I have a naginata, it was a wedding present.
Just
Our
nice.
groomsmen were our instructors at our school. So for our wedding, they pooled their money and bought us a naginata.
That's
One.
awesome.
They gave it to us at the rehearsal dinner and looked at me and smiled and said, fight for it. Guess which side of the room it's on in our house? No one pointed at me. Well, you're wrong. It became a woman's weapon.
Yeah.
It was not on the battlefield.
Yeah.
But what happened was, during the 16th century, when all the boys were off playing soldier, the women were left at home, and it was their job, it was your job to raise the kids, protect the house, protect the village, and protect yourself. Pretty much in that order. Oh yeah, livestock, then yourself. In most feudal Japanese households, the cow was more valuable than the wife.
That's too bad.
Horses were a lot more valuable.
Oh, yeah.
She agrees with that one in most cases, but not for her.
Aw.
Anyway, for women to be able to fight back, and I don't mean this, I teach self-defense for a living. If you want to pretend that there's no difference between men and women, that's fine. Go play your video games. There are differences. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but they're not the same. If you think men and women are the same, you have no knowledge of plumbing whatsoever. But anyway, for women to be able to protect themselves against someone who is generally taller and heavier built, and especially to protect the village against brigands, people on horseback.
Yeah.
That little knife that you get to carry like this and throw yourself at them didn't work very well against somebody on a horse. So if you took a sword and you put it on a stick and you lightened it, the battlefield version for men against heavily armored opponents, obviously heavier grade weapon than something for unarmored women to use on unarmored opponents. But you got a lighter weapon that you learn to go, wah, wham! Because you on a horse, maybe I can't reach you going, yay, sticky, sticky. Going, boop, that works. You're dead. And it was so popular that today, if you're in kendo, the sports sort of stuff, they have entire naginata groups that are dedicated just to women. The Naginata Federation in California, women's groups, and they're deadly.
And your horses,
Are you-
the first
is she part of
thing
it?
to do, if it's a matter of survival, take out the horse's legs.
But they didn't do that in Japan because of what she said. Horses were more valuable than the warrior, and Japanese if you guys are familiar, do anybody familiar with horses at all?
Yeah.
All right.
I rode a horse
Very.
once.
I rode a horse once on purpose. In Europe, European war horses average 16 hands.
Yeah.
The average Japanese war horse in the 1500s was 12 hands.
Yeah.
Zapponi. We raised Akitas, the Japanese guard dogs. Our male was about that size. I mean, a 12-hand horse, they didn't do the knight's tale jousting and armor and crash into the front ranks of warriors. You normally shot arrows from horseback. Have you seen Yabusame, the Japanese traditional archery? They go thundering by a target and they go boom when they shoot a plate this big around from 6 feet away. That was from battlefield tactics, because what you did is you came charging up because you stayed out of reach. Then you rode your horse really, really fast right up to the bad guys and turned this way. And from right here, I would go boom and shoot an arrow right at your face, because even in armor, the mempo, the face mask, was the weakest part of the armor. So when you watch Abusame, they're shooting plates that are the same size as face masks. That's why. Doink, doink, doink. And about the time somebody goes, wait, let's stick out a naginata and cut them up, I'm going to go that way again. That's why the Mongols could turn and shoot in their seat.
Yeah.
Japanese didn't do that part, but they shot sideways.
That's why they were
That's
dangerous.
why.
Is it the Mongos that would, because I noticed when I watched it, I used to watch it on TV, they would fly by and then turn and shoot behind them. Is that what the Mongos?
Yes, I just said that.
Yeah, they could
But
yes, that was
stand up and they were
that was.
okay.
But see, the Mongolian warriors used a short bow,
Okay.
and it was much, much more effective for fast firing and for being able to turn and pivot.
The Japanese bow that I'm thinking of was called they were really long.
It was a really long bow. Yes,
It's called
You're talking about the ages of some of the weapons that you got. What kind of records? I mean, how do you age a sword if you just find it in a garage? I'm just curious.
that's actually a really good question.
I
and-
agree.
And the easiest answer I can give you is I tend to do a lot of metaphors and analogies. They have sword competitions, actually, where they'll take just the blade and they will wrap a towel around the nakago, the tang, and that's where the markings are, and there's a lot of ways you can tell relative age by looking under the handle to see the layers of rust and pitting and stuff of the steel. But they will do competitions and they'll wrap the handle so all you can see is the blade itself. And they do it in rounds where you have to separate it by sword period, Shinto being anything that's in the last 450 years, and then Kodo going from 450 to 900, and then they do century, then decade, then year, then school. And if it's a famous blade or a famous smithy, the last round you have to actually name the smith who made it, all just from how the blade looks. And it's a combination of the shape and the condition of the steel. And so the metaphor is this, and I don't mean to offend anybody. I use stereotype metaphors because they're easier to understand. Just assuming, if my wife knows nothing about cars, she does, but we walk outside, a car goes by, and my wife goes, ooh, look, pretty red car. And I go, that's a 57 Chevy Bel Air with a 283 small block. She says, how can you tell? I'm like, by the shape. If you don't know anything about cars, it's a red car. If you know a little bit, it's a Chevy. If you know a little bit more, the little symbol on the side lets you know it's a small block, and you get all these details. And for people who know swords, they can kind of do the same thing. I knew the 700-year-old blade, I knew it was old. I assumed that it was at least 500 years old, just by the shape and the way it was forged. It was a Kodo period, because that's how they forged swords back then. I didn't know more than that, because I use the swords more than, and that's why we had it sent to the West Coast, and we had experts look at it, and they were able to get it that close, to get it to the individual smith. That we did simply by the markings on it, that it was one of 5 made by the same smith, because he engraved them the same, so they were identifiable by what they are. But that's why there's also controversy in the sword world, because you will find people who sell swords, and not just in America where we're trying to make a buck. People are people all over. In Japan, it was very common for people selling blades to engrave on the handle, the nakago, the tang of the sword, would have the swordsmith's name on it. Kodo period blades, the old ones, 700, 900 years old, it wasn't very common to actually sign your work. It was expected that people could recognize who made the sword. But about 200 years ago, a lot of older swords, Japanese merchants were forging names on them to command higher prices. And we were at a sword show and we saw a Masamune blade. Masamune is the most famous sword maker in Japanese history. I stood in line for 45 minutes once to handle one of his blades. It wasn't mounted at all, and there was a line, and you had to hold fresh towels to even handle the blade because it was worth $250,000. I stood in line for 40, but this guy at a sword show was selling a blade that was a Muramasa blade, and he could prove it because it was signed. And it had the kanji for Muramasa, and it was a sword that went back to, it was a Russian-Japanese war from 1877 to 1905. It was a specific style. I mean, even as little as I know, I could tell it was from the Japanese-Russian war. But, oh no, it's a Muramasa blade. It's $2,300. Like, really? I got a Lexus in the parking lot I'll sell you for $100. It's like that gigantic ring that you bought your girlfriend in the trunk of somebody's car for $20. She's not going to be impressed with that. I'm talking too much, aren't I?
A little bit.
Okay. But we still have questions. That are people just begging for release. Yes.
I know you said that you had met somebody at a con who had the fire blade of the five.
It was in a Tokenkai, Japanese
Is it
sword.
known, like, who has the other three?
We do not know yet, and neither did the gentleman.
He didn't
who had
know
that.
either. And that was, to be honest with you, that's the pinnacle of our collection. It was one of the 2 or cheaper swords in his.
Wow.
He said, sometime you come to Washington State, you come stay in my house. I have vault room. Good swords, I'll show you. And I'm like, we are so trying to get booked for a convention in Washington State. I don't care about the people there. I just want to go look at his swords. We have an invite. Is there anything else? I really need to let you guys go. It's ridiculously hot in here. Thank you so much for sitting through the panel. If you have more questions yourself, please find us.
You can also like our page on Facebook, Samurai Dan and Jillian, and message us questions and stuff there too. If anybody wanted DVDs, we'll have them. We'll have them here all weekend, but we won't be carrying them with us all the time. But if you want to get them at a later point also.
The other
reach
panels
out
I'm
at any
doing are
point.
helping, where I'm just going to be the stupid guy with the smart mouth.
Oh.
So if you have specific martial arts questions, swords, and self-defense stuff, find me in the hallway. I'll be roaming around as often as I can slip the leash.
Question for you.
And I'm here for you. Yes! Ask me the question, I'm not afraid.
You said you do a bunch of different martial arts. Do you do any basic jiu-jitsu?
No, familiar with it, but we don't do a lot of ground fighting. Some, but not a lot.